Good morning. Are we? Where is it? Can you hear me? I don't think I hear it coming over the. You do hear? Okay. All right. Good. Good morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning adult class. We're in the last stages of our study through the summer, where each of the men of the congregation take turns. And of course, this morning is my turn. I think next week Tom has the last section, but this morning we're going to cover Judges 17, 18, and 19, 3 chapters, and then Tom will have 20 and 21 next week. So by now you're all familiar with Judges and the cycles we see, where we have a statement that Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and then God sends someone for discipline, typically a pagan nation nearby, that comes and deals with them as God directs. And then Israel cries out to the Lord, and then God sends a judge to deliver Israel from the person who is oppressing them. And then there's a period of rest at some point, and then the cycle repeats itself, and it repeats itself, and it repeats itself. And we see all these ugly things happen in the book of Judges. And usually the evil that Israel did comes from either morality or religious problems, idolatry primarily, not following God's instructions that he had just given back in the time when Moses was receiving the commandments. So it wasn't that long previously. But the commentators say that the last 5 chapters of Judges are a bit different, because we change away from that cycle, and they said it's really a double conclusion. And the point of the last 5 chapters is to show a good example of how bad things had gotten, basically. So we see an example in chapters 18 and 19 that deals with an example of how bad the idolatry was, and then 19 through 21 is how bad the moral depravity and yeah, it's one of the worst stories you'll run across in the Bible. It's right up there with the Sodom and Gomorrah story. So we have 2 very strong examples to show what happens when the people try to rule themselves. So, and then in chapter 17, it has the same statements that we see through the book of Judges, which is every man did what was right in his own eyes. We see that in 17:6, and also in those days there was no king in Israel. So the first statement, did what was right in their own eyes, that contrasts with what Moses told them to do what's right in the sight of the Lord. But in Deuteronomy 31, God told Moses that the Israelites would fall away from him and they would do what was right in their own eyes. So his predictions, of course, come true here in the time of Judges. In the second statement, there was no king in Israel, and the Israel nation was ignoring the Lord as king, and also they had no human king as the other nations around them had. So they basically started doing what they each thought was right, and we get a very good example of where that ends up. Later in 1 Samuel chapter 8, which is just slightly post-Judges period of time, we see this section. It says, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramoth and said to him, 'Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations.' But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, 'Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who will reign over them.'" And of course, we know the history after that. We had the United Kingdom with Saul, David, and Solomon. and things were fairly stable, but there were a lot of strife and problems. But then the divided kingdom came. We had the separation of Israel with the 10 kingdoms, 10 tribes to the north, and Judah to the south, and how bad so many of those kings were. And eventually that led to the captivity that God sent the Assyrians in 734 and the Babylonians in 582, 86, 80 something in there, and took them into captivity, which was the end of that period of time until they came back to reestablish the temple later. So we see a good timeline of where this all ends up. So begin with chapters 17 and 18. There's a story about an Ephraimite family, a tribe that's been center stage in several of the stories so far. And the character is Micah, and is also a Levite from Bethlehem. His name is Jonathan. And it involves the tribe of Dan as well, and mainly concerns, as I said, idolatry. So we'll try to keep it moving here to get through this. 3 chapters is quite a bit, but verses 1 and 2. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah, and he said to his mother, "The 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it." And his mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord." Now, right off the bat, the guy steals silver from his mother. It's like, what's going on here? And then what makes him decide to return it? Was it they heard his mother give a curse, and he was afraid that the curse was going to negatively impact him, and he finally decides, oh, this wasn't really a good idea? So he fesses up to his mother that he had stolen her silver. And then his mother's response is also equally puzzling to me. If I did something like that to my parents, I think they'd club me. I don't know. But the mother's either happy to have the silver back, or maybe she was afraid that the curse she had uttered, now if she finds out, it would actually go against her son. I don't know. But she seems quite happy. So verses 3 through 6. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, "I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a carved image and a metal image. Now therefore I will restore it to you." So he restored the money to his mother. His mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image. And it was in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and an household gods, and ordained one of his sons who became his priest. And in those days there was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So right off the bat, the second commandment, Exodus 20, verse 4, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness or anything in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water beneath the earth. So he busted that right off the bat. He's ordained his son. Of course, you had to be a priest, you need to be a Levite, verse by Exodus 29. And then the 200 pieces of silver, that's approximately 80 ounces, about 5 pounds of silver. That's quite a bit. It must be a wealthy family. But obviously, Micah, his mother, and his son are conducting religious worship practices based on their own preferences, and these are surely what they've borrowed from the pagan nations around them. And the carved image, typically it'd be, I guess, wood, metal, or stone, and then they would take gold or silver and pound it down thin to make silver leaf or gold leaf, and then cover that on the outside. And a graven image is just a melted image where they've melted it and poured it into a mold to make something. And that whole concept kind of blows my mind to think you're going to make something and then you're going to worship what you just made. Beyond me. But anyway, we'll get into that later. So verses 7 through 13. Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judea, of the house of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judea to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim in the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said, "I am a Levite of Bethlehem in Judea, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place." And Micah said to him, "Stay with me and be to me a father and a priest, and I will give you 10 pieces of silver a year and a suit of clothes in your living." And the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man came to him like he was in the house of Micah. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest." Okay, so the young man probably means he was less than 25 years old, but actually to be a priest you need to be 25. But we know the Levites had a support system that was identified in Deuteronomy 18, where they didn't inherit land, they were dispersed through the tribes, and there was a method of tithes that supported the Levites so they could act as priests among the other nations. And so whether that system had broken down and he's wandering around looking for a place so he could survive, but it seems like there's no real plan or purpose to his movements. He's just kind of wandering around hoping something kind of pops up for him, which is not the best way to do things. And then Micah gives him a job offer so he could be a priest for them. And then his conclusion in verse 13, where he thinks he's now going to be blessed because he has a Levite as a priest, one of those situations where I think we can easily deceive ourselves and talk ourselves into thinking things are better than they are. It reminded me of Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, where it says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, and who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Micah's thinking this is the good thing, but this is not a good thing at all. So that gets us up to chapter 18. The members of the tribe of Dan enter the picture at this point. That Dan was, when they originally were assigned land, they were in the southern part of the kingdom, and the Philistines in Deuteronomy 7 were there, and then later in Judges 1 it mentions the Amorites were also in that territory, and Dan was never successful in pushing them out, even though God had told them, I will be with you and support you and push these people out. So I don't really understand why Dan was never able to do that, but they lived with them in that area, and the people of Dan decided they wanted to try to move someplace else. So they were looking for other land. So that's what we have in the beginning of Judges chapter 18. In those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in, for until then no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole company of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to explore it. And they said to them, "Go and explore the land." And when they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there, and when they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. And they turned aside and said to him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What is your business here?" And he said to them, "This is how Micah dealt with me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest." And they said to him, "Inquire of God, please, that we may know whether the journey on which we are setting out will succeed." And the priest said to him, "Go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eyes of the Lord." So they sent out spies, much like we think of Caleb and Joshua during the wilderness wanderings, to see if they can find some land that they can take. And then they get to Ephraim, and they come across Micah's house, and they recognize the voice of this Levite. So that's the question: was it an accent, or did they know him personally? It seems kind of unusual. But later in verse 30 of chapter 18, we see the name of the Levite, and his name is listed as Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Manasseh. And Gershom is also the oldest son of Moses, and the commentators say that the Hebrew Bible, there's a single letter difference between Manasseh and Moses, and some believe that Jonathan is likely the grandson of Moses, which maybe he was a bit of a celebrity to some extent. Maybe that's how they would have known him. And that also brings up the question, could in 2 generations this much decay happen in the religious practices within the nation of Israel? Several of the commentators mentioned that these stories are not necessarily in chronological order. They're not happening at the very end of Judges, but if you want to tell a story about someone you knew in your life that had a bad experience, you don't necessarily give their life in a chronological order. You just say the worst situations, and I think this might be what's happening here. But I think sometimes we underestimate how much drift there can be in thought in a generation or two. If you think back to when you were a kid, did you agree 100% with everything your parents thought when you were a teenager? More or less some, but in a lot of ways, no. And then you think back when your parents were, when they were in their teens, how did they think compared to their grandparents? So each generation, there's some movement, and it can sneak up pretty quickly. Isn't that what Reagan's famous quote about you're only one generation away from losing a republic, something to that extent. But Jonathan may have been the grandson of Moses. It's an interesting thought. And then the Levite thinks he's now going to be blessed because he has a Levite as a priest. I'm pretty skeptical of that. Okay, Judges 18, verses 7 through 10. And then the 5 men departed and came to Laish and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that was in the earth and possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. And they came to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol. Their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" And they said, "Arise, and let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and behold, it is very good. And will you do nothing? Do not be slow to go and enter and possess the land. And as soon as you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in the earth." Again, this town Laish was at the northern end of the promised land, which is a long ways from where Dan was originally allotted land at the southern tip of the promised area. And their claim that God was giving them land may have come from the Levite blessing, but it wouldn't appear that that would be the case, even though they still might be able to militarily overtake the place. So now we're up to Judges 18, 11 through 17. So 600 men of the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol and went up in the encampment at Kiriath-Jearim in Judea. On this account, that place is called Mahanaim to this place, and behold, it is west of Kiriath-Jearim. And they passed on from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brothers, "Do you know that in these houses there is an ephod, household gods, a carved image, and a metal image? Now therefore consider what you will do." And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite in the home of Micah and asked him about his welfare. Now the 600 men of the Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood at the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone out to scout the land came up and entered and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, while the priest stood at the entrance of the gate, while the 600 armed men with their weapons of war. So we have the 5 spies seeming to encourage the stealing of the idols from Micah, and of course they've got 600 armed men standing there, so they've got a lot of strength. There's not much fight at this point, but we'll see what happens here. verses 18 through 26. And when these came into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod and the household gods and the metal image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Keep quiet, put your hand on your mouth, and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or a priest to a tribe and a clan of Israel?" And the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. When they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan, and they shouted to the people of Dan who were turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you come with such a company?" And he said to him, "You take my gods that I made and the priest and go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you?" And the people of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voices be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the people of Dan went their way. And then Micah saw they were too strong for him. They turned and went back on his home. So it's almost a funny story in that they steal the idols from the Levite, and then they make him an offer he can't refuse. And he says, "Oh, we'll just go with these guys anyway." So he seems to be happy to join the families from Dan. And then obviously the 600 men, they're also including all the stuff they need to set up living in the new town. They're bringing their livestock and their kids and families and household goods. They've got everything together. So they're not traveling very fast. So when they leave, they put the armed men at the back because they know they're going to get pursued. So the guys at the back are ready to defend them when the people catch up with them. And of course they do. You're traveling with farm animals. You're not moving too fast. So the Micah's house, they get a group of people together and go after them, and then there's this verbal confrontation. Verse 24, "You took my gods that I made." That is so crazy to me that someone could think something you made was a god. That kind of bounces off my head. It just doesn't go in. Why not just make more? If you're worried about it, you got some more silver from your mother, you just steal it and make another one. You're good. It's all kind of pointless. But Micah, has at least enough wisdom to understand you don't get into a fight when you know you're not going to win. So he backs off. But there's no integrity in anybody in his entire account so far. So up to Judges 18:27 through 31. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made and the priests who belonged to him, and they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belonged to Beth Rehob. Then they rebuilt the city and lived in it. Excuse me. They named the city Dan after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel, but the name of the city was Laish at first. And the people of Dan set up a carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Manasseh or Moses, depending, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he had made, as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. It's kind of ironic that in a book about God sending judges to deliver the Israelite people from the oppressors, now it's flipped, where the Israelites themselves are the oppressors against the people that God did not dictate for them to attack. They seem to be living peacefully, and there's no one to deliver the people at Laish from their Israelite oppressors. So the people of Dan established a graven image idol worship center and in their new living quarters. And the day of captivity may refer either to 1 Samuel chapter 4 through 6, where the Ark of the Covenant fell into the hands of the Philistines, but I think more likely it actually refers to when the Assyrians took the northern divided kingdom of Israel into captivity in 734. So that would have been a good long period of time. And it's interesting that the scripture mentions, in contrast, when it says they set up this worship center, but the house of the Lord was still at Shiloh. And Shiloh was where the tabernacle was to have been, and where the worship was to occur under the law that Moses received. So it contrasts the two of what they should have been doing versus what they were actually doing. And then we see later in 1 Kings chapter 12 where it mentions erecting golden calves at Bethel and Dan under Jeroboam. So it's clear that this idolatry started and just continued on for a long period of time. So these two chapters really tell the story of Micah and idolatry, and it shows the Danites embracing that, stealing his idols and setting up their own worship that then lasted for, I would think, hundreds of years until 734 when the Assyrians came to take them captive. So they chose the wrong person to lead them. They chose the wrong place to worship. They worshiped the wrong deity. And they had no moral standards, really, as they were doing whatever made them personally happy. So we see a pretty serious amount of religious decay at the time. So that's 17 and 18. We'll get to chapter 19 here. And this switches and talks about a horrific event that happened in Gibeah that shows the moral depravity of what had taken over the Israelites, what they'd let themselves fall into. It is very reminiscent of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19. And then chapters 20 and 21 continue the fallout from what happens in chapter 19. So let's wade into this one. This is not a very pleasant story, but verses 1 through 4. In those days when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judea. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judea, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her to bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple donkeys. And she brought him to her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate, drank, and spent the night there. Okay. This certain Levite is not the same Levite as we saw in the chapters 17 and 18 in the Micah story. And then it mentions that the concubine was unfaithful. The Hebrew for that term is not clear on the meaning. It could be just they had an argument and she left, went to her father's house, and not really sure. And the whole concept of the concubine, I still can't wrap my mind around. They describe it as less than a wife, but more than a slave. And if you offspring from a concubine actually had an ability to inherit, so it was like an offspring. So, but yeah, it's a strange situation. So the concubine leaves, and Levite 4 months later finds her at her father's house. So he goes there. All is good so far. We have verses 5 through 9. And on the 4th day, they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthening your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go." So the two of them sat and ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, "Be blessed to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart. And the girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry, and tomorrow you may arise early in the morning for your journey and go home." This is almost a comical description of the guy getting talked into staying and hanging out for a few more days, which he does. So we have verses 10 through 14. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. I guess Jebus came from the people who lived there, the Jebusites. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. And when they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." And his master said to him, "I will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah." And he said to his young man, "Come and let us draw nearer one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah." So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So they left the original place late in the day, and they're traveling with donkeys. They're not making a very quick progress, and of course they're on foot. It looks like Jebus, or what was Jerusalem, was about 6 miles. They had traveled on foot. So had they started earlier in the day, they could have made the entire trip and not had to stay all night. But because they got started late, they only made it as far as they did. And the Canaanites, the Jebusites, held Jerusalem at this point, and I guess the Benjaminites lived within them. So the Levite says he feels better if he would make it to where there was an Israelite city and not have to stay in a city controlled by foreigners. So he decides to make it. It was another 2 miles to get to Gibeah. So that's where they made it to when the sun finally went down, which again belongs to the tribe of Benjamin. So we have verses 15 through 21. And when they turned aside to go in and spend the night in Gibeah, they went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into their house to spend the night. And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field in the evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. And the men of the place were Benjaminites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judea to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judea, and now I'm going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your female servant and young man with your servants. There was no lack of anything." And the old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. In the Old Testament, we see numerous places where hospitality was actually commanded. Leviticus 19, 33 and 34 says, "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." So there was a command, and they would, I guess, go to the city center, and as people came back from their work from the day, they would be hospitable, and they would say, "Here, come stay with us for the evening." So these people had been out there, and no one had done that to them. So the old man, who was actually not a Benjaminite, but he was evidently somewhat transient himself, but had a place there offered for them to stay. And he was surely aware it was a good idea to avoid staying in the city square. And when we see here in the next section what happens. And as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now, violate them, and do what you will with them, what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the house, of the man's house, where the master was, until it was light. Again, the story is a horrific event. It is a repeat of the Sodom and Gomorrah issues. But these were not pagans. These were the Israelites. These were the Benjaminites. Moral depravity is a new low. The old man, the homeowner, does not protect the people in his house. Amazingly enough, offers up his daughters. I can't wrap my mind around that either. And the Levite is quite selfish to push the concubine out to save himself. And they really did very little. I don't know whether, from a security standpoint, the houses were so porous that if the people outside wanted in, they would take all of them. I don't know. It's hard story, a difficult story to even read. But we'll go on to 27 and 30. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let us be going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or has been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." Yeah, this horrific event is so the Levite unbelievably callous and says, "I want to leave," when the concubine was laying on the floor. She obviously died at the door in the morning. And he places her body on the donkey and heads home, and then does this unbelievable thing of cutting her limbs into pieces and sending them somehow to other parts of the territory. It's a very, very difficult story. Almost makes me wonder if it says things haven't happened since they came out of Egypt. Could things like this have happened when they were in Egypt? I don't know. But in chapter 19, we have homosexual intent, heterosexual gang rape, physical abuse, failure to protect the vulnerable, and murder. And this is all done by the Benjaminites. This isn't a pagan nation, but these are the Benjaminites. So there was no king. They were doing what was right in their own eyes. So without a moral standard of Scripture, this gives us a good example of what happens in man's mind over a period of time. Humans, we know in history, even in the last 100 years, there are plenty of examples in our quote modern history of people being incredibly despicable and violent to fellow humans. A lot of things in wars and nations all over the world, we've heard about terrible things that people have done to others. And as people lose any respect for God and become more atheistic and have less of a mindset of understanding that there are moral standards, when we start choosing our own moral standards, the capability to do good goes way, way down very quickly. And I think we've kind of seen that some in our society in the last 50 years, from when I was a kid versus what it is now. The growth in atheism and belief that there is no God makes people think everything's pointless long term, so I need to be concerned about the pleasure and enjoyment I have now, and everything else doesn't matter because once I die, it's all done. There's no big deal. And there is no standard, there is no moral authority. At that point, life becomes very cheap. So pendulum and human nature tends to swing back and forth, and we tend to be swinging toward that end, and hopefully something causes it to stop and come back. But it is quite discouraging. But I have heard some claim that the youngest generation now is beginning to have much more interest in God and theism than in the past, and let's hope so. One thing that, about out of time, when George Washington finished up his, I think he was president for 2 terms, correct, if I remember right? I think in 1796, he gave a farewell speech, and back then they didn't have microphone systems and PAs and internet. So what he did is he wrote the speech and he mailed it to newspapers all over the country. At that point, that was based on the 13 colonies, so it wasn't a very big country compared to today. But it was published in all these newspapers so it could get sent out to the people so the people could get to read his address. It's a long address, very eloquent, but he has a section in there. And I've had people I work with who were very well-educated people make the point to me that the world would be just so much better off if we could get rid of all this religion stuff. And they have a very dim grasp of what effect that would actually have. And I think this is an example in Judges of what we see when people don't have a valid religion to help guide them and the effect of the moral standards. But George Washington said, and I love the way he writes, it's beautiful. We think those guys back there weren't that smart, man. They could write like nobody's business. I got a second here. He says, he's describing all the different things that are important for the country to make sure the country survives and perpetuates, because at this point it had only been a country for 8 years under the Constitution. So he's mentioning all the things that he sees that are important, and he lists dealing with debt, dealing with nations, and a variety of things, but he says this: of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim that the tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. The mere politician, equally with the pious man, ought to respect and cherish them. A volume could not trace all their connections with private and public felicity. Felicity meaning happiness and bliss. I had to look that one up myself. Let it be simply asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in the courts? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded that the influence of refined education in minds of a particular structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion to religious principle. So I think he's exactly on point, and the people that think that we can survive in an atheistic society for any length of time, I think Judges gives us a very good example that that's not the case. So it's a very difficult story, but it gives us a good example of where man ends up without religious guidance and having God and the standards. So.